Okay. Okay, can you all see okay?
Yep.
Yes. Okay. All right, so just a kind of a little basic primer. I wanted to keep this for the most part, non-clinical, in the sense of sitting down and talking about the DSM is not very useful to most people's lives, though I'm open to questions if people have those kinds of questions. So as Keegan and I discussed, it's kind of just a general primer of things we might be keeping in mind for good mental health for this year. One thing I like to do is a little bit demystify that mental health services are for certain kinds of people. So mental health services, and I think actually even in the last 6 or 8 months, some of this discussion has begun to change. I think the pandemic has normalized a lot of things, and one of them is talking about mental health as everybody's concern. So that's something that I think we're all just taking a little bit more seriously. Also, many of us have had a lot of our supports taken away, things that would help us regulate as busy adults in the world. We don't have our vacations, and we don't have our spa days, and we don't have our Mariners games and whatever. So I think things just, it puts a little bit more of a focus on like, oh, how do I actually have to take care of myself and attend to myself? But I really just want to make the point that you don't have to have a major disorder to have mental health needs. You just have to be a person. And of course, in these crazy times, it's a little bit more intensified. So there's just a finer point on that taking care of self and how maybe we feel taken care of in our lives. So what I put together is just kind of to address, like, what are those major categories that we might be keeping in mind for that good mental health hygiene? And also, how do I know when I might want to seek professional help? And if anybody has any more specific questions than what I cover on this, you're also welcome to contact me confidentially or after this presentation or through email. And my contact info is at the end of this presentation too. And I just have a couple references for what what helped me put this together today. I'm not blocking with my little window. Am I blocking the words? Okay. The Yale School of Psychology, they have a really great sort of like, it's termed the happiness lab, which is a little bit corny. But there's some useful studies going on all over the place, actually. I would say this is kind of a golden age of interesting research in this field. So I'm going to focus a little bit on that Yale School of Psychology, the Happiness Lab, and Tara Brach, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard of. She's really famous for being kind of like a leader in the mindfulness movement. And she crosses over in kind of between psychology and that sort of wellness world, but in a much more interesting way than some. And then Duke University also has kind of an interesting lab in the sense that they have been pursuing research about very simple practices that help people kind of get their mind in a better place, because boy, do most of us need it on a regular basis. And this year that's been tenfold. Oops, I lost you. Okay. All right. So when we think about mental health hygiene in this field now, we think of it more as a whole self thing. We don't think of it just in terms of go talk about your parents and your feelings, and that's that. And certainly this is something I think we've all personally learned this year. If you hadn't thought about it before, you're probably well aware of it now. That these things are all so connected: our body, our mind, our emotions, and anything that has to do with how we make meaning and find our place in the world. And like I say, I think because this year's been so intense for so many of us in so many ways, I really feel like the discussion of all these things has been elevated quite a bit. So some of this might even be very familiar to you based on kind of the more common discussions we're having day to day on all these topics. So I just laid out 6 points of things that are kind of like a great idea to be keeping in mind for staying afloat this year. The first one is very basic: move your body, right? Getting exercise, getting out there. Movement itself is highly linked with an improved mood. And so I want to point out the third category: breathing, exercises, and yoga, right? Moving your body does not always mean vigorous exercise. It does not always mean something that has that upregulating tendency. It can also be that there's something involved with engaging your body in order to kind of center. So inclusion of the body, but also movement would be this category. Oh, you know what? I wanted to point out in listing these, I kind of, in my slides, I'll just indicate how each of these categories is being represented, just if that's useful for you, if you're the kind of person that might be tracking that kind of thing. So the first thing, obviously, body, right? The second one, prioritize rest and sleep, would draw on the body and the mind, right? The reason we need rest and the reason we need to really put focus on our sleep is that we need that restoration in order to function with even just managing day-to-day stress. So restoration is one piece, relaxation, obviously another piece. We also know that sleep disorders are much more rampant in this time than ever before, which is interesting, isn't it? That we have less busyness and we have more sleeplessness. It's kind of an interesting dichotomy. There's a lot of that this year. We're just seeing all kinds of things fly off the charts when it comes to disordered, like, day-to-day behavior. So when we think about rest and sleep, we're thinking about ways that we de-stress. We're thinking about ways that we actually restore ourselves, not just in terms of choosing things that are down-regulating, but also choosing things that have maybe a refreshing aspect to them. The Netflix binge is one of the jokes of our time, right? Of this quarantine time, or over drinking, right? These kinds of things can seem like they're a not bad choice after work to get into that kind of behavior that might be a little bit on the slothy side. But what we know is we tend not to feel restored when we have that kind of behavior. So anything in that overuse category, that kind of tends not to give us rest. It tends to add more stress. And working from home has really changed the pattern for a lot of people. So there's a little bit more of a focus on how one chooses to spend their time and how refreshing and how restoring that is. Then, of course, we have the issue of screen time. So again, off the charts this year. So sometimes even having hygiene and limits around how we use our screens, which is always ironic to be saying while on a screen. All right, so from the Duke University School of Psychiatry comes this thing called 3 Good Things. And I'd be interested if anyone's ever heard of this. And things like this, I'm generally kind of allergic to. I don't like kind of pat little techniques like this. However, I have been compelled by this research. We're quite hardwired for a negative bias in our brains, and it's for good reason. The classic psychological example is if you're walking on a path, or if, primitive man or woman is walking on a path and sees a stick in the path, it's a more life-preserving interpretation that might be a snake than that it is a stick, right? So to see the stick as a snake actually might save your life. If you assume it's a stick and it is a snake, you might in fact be poisoned to death. So we kind of have this as animals. We have sort of a fight-flight wiring built in just because we're animals. However, the stress that we have now is very different than what we've had historically. And so a lot of us can stay in that fight-flight mode with some regularity. So this 3 good things aspect would be to be working the muscle of positivity, just to counteract the general negative bias, which is greater when we're socializing less. Interestingly, when we're in our heads more, we tend to have an increase in that negativity bias. And so the concept here is rewiring towards a positive end, and that it's just helpful to be, you could list those things before bed, and they could be as simple as you enjoyed your dinner, you didn't fight with your spouse, and you enjoyed that Netflix show that you did not binge or did, whatever. All right, number 4, relationships matter. So this would be drawing on mind and emotions, right? We need to be met in our relationship life. We need to be met in our intellect. We need to be fed by each other and in our smarts, and also emotionally. Stephen Porges is a neuroscientist who discovered the polyvagal theory. I won't get into all of that right now, but what we can say about that now is that we really know how deeply connected our emotions are with our social engagement out in the world. And we have known this for a long time in psychology related to attachment, but it's really been located now in the body in a much more concrete way, that we know that we regulate through one another. So this interesting year of being apart from one another or being stuck together with only the same couple people has really challenged us in this way. So for us to have an inventory of what we might need in our relationship life, whether that's expanding some, it's really quite a better picture when the weather is nicer. We can do more outside with folks. But to know that meeting of face-to-face, that meeting of body connection to another, the way that we have to prioritize meeting our emotional needs through one another really can't be minimized. Esther Perel, if anyone's heard of her, she says the quality of our relationships determines the quality of our lives. She's a famed relationship couples therapist in New York City. And also the middle slide just indicates that sometimes, the Zoom meetings that we all were very excited about having in the beginning, where we were seeing our family and friends and those in that kind of jovial way, sometimes that doesn't quite meet us in terms of what we need from one another. And so we might do well on occasion to consider having a deeper level connection than just sort of updates with the family or always talking about our stress level. The fifth thing would be to participate in meaningful things. If you have a spiritual practice or if you have a spiritual community, that's one way. But just to really enlarge that category, to include, the not to go academic, but to include the existential element. What brings you a sense of meaning in your life? What makes you feel connected? It's really important in this time when we have such a kind of pruned experience of contact with our regular activities. It's so important that we either do engage with those things that give us meaning or have some immersion in that topic. So it could be reading a good book or having a good conversation with a friend about things that are mutually meaningful. And then the sixth thing would be make time for your emotions. Feelings are, this is kind of boilerplate psychotherapy stuff, right? But it's much easier to avoid difficult emotions than it is to go through them. But we tend to know that makes them worse. So anything difficult that one is facing right now, this is something that we're experiencing a lot in the field of psychotherapy, is that people are fleeing to therapy because there is such a changed atmosphere out there in terms of carrying the stress and the regular life concerns much more individually or in our small family groups than before. So one idea for this would be to think about how you might be able to either write or talk, or even just sort of in a meditative way, reflect on your feelings and on a daily basis or on a much more regular basis. This is something that some people find actually can make the difference between getting depressed or having a severe episode of anxiety and being able to feel stable through these crazy months. And that's where Tara Brach comes in. She has an acronym called RAIN. And again, her focus is mindfulness. So this is sort of in that area where psychology and those mindfulness practices connect. And RAIN stands for, it's a concept for how to lean into your emotional life. She says to recognize your feelings, just even to check in with how am I feeling, and to accept whatever's there. I think sometimes what we find there is disappointing, or it's not as we would like to feel. What's it like to just accept whatever's there is fine and good. And then to inquire, just to lean in a little bit. What might that be? Right? Not as an overthinking exercise, but as something that really just has a gentle reflection in it of like landing on it, and maybe landing and maybe staying for a few moments. And then nurture. What might I need right now? And again, we're signaling self-care. or identifying a care that one needs from another. If nothing helps, if none of those things that I just mentioned give any relief, and you've had something a little bit more severe in a period that lasts longer than 2 weeks, it's probably a good idea to reach out. Prolonged anxiety, sleep problems, feeling very depressed, negativity or apathy, anything like that can come and go. But generally speaking, that the 2-week window is the clinical concern, after which, we all know we can have a bad week. We all know we can even have a bad day or two, right? If it keeps going on and on, it's probably a good idea to reach out to somebody. That could be talking to your doctor. That could be talking to a friend on a more thorough level and seeing if that's helpful. If not, it probably is a good idea to see if you could talk to somebody professionally. This goes for the people that you care for too. If you're noticing something lasting longer than a couple of weeks, to think about reaching out. All right, and there's my info. So if you have any questions or anything that you're wondering about, if it's in a more severe category than kind of general maintenance through this time, feel free to reach out to me through my website. There's a contact me tab, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have about mental health.
Liz,
Yeah,
I have a question.
Sure.
Some of these ideas, and I agree with, but if how do you get someone to get motivated to do it, to
Yeah.
exercise, to not binge watch, to, reflect on things?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of follow-up questions I would have for you, such as, the age of the person matters, right? You're hearing this a lot. I have a tween in my household and a young teen, and it's very hard to get them out the door. You would think they might be bouncing off the walls. It's quite the opposite, right? So we're seeing a lot of this with the teen populations, a lot of like lassitude, really difficult to get moving at all. For older folks, are you talking about somebody peer aged?
Or 30s, 40s?
Yeah. I mean, I think what we have to be thinking about when there's a lot of kind of low motivation, low volition, low energy, sleeping a lot or not sleeping enough, those are signs of depression. And a lot of times depression doesn't look like someone is sad. A lot of times depression looks like there's kind of no activity. There's kind of a person's life might sort of flatline. Now we have to keep in mind right now that is more normative than in typical times, but that doesn't mean that somebody teetering with having a more severe depressive episode isn't still something that you want to treat.
So that means professional help, is what you're saying.
Yeah, or I think if this is a loved one, a really maybe more like serious heart to heart, like, hey, how are you feeling? I'm worried, right? It seems like, and from what I know, those kinds of overdoing it activities always kind of skew towards making that any kind of mood situation kind of worse. So just kind of, it could be checking in with that person, seeing how they're really doing. But what you would be thinking about is are they really maybe more depressed? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I had a question.
Yeah.
Do you have ideas or resources if we have like friends or loved ones who, because healthcare in our country is based on where you work, and some people don't have jobs right now, like finding like affordable mental health help for people who are unemployed or their insurance is terrible, or
Yeah, I actually wrote an article. I could send it to you on alternatives to therapy.
okay.
For the Emerald. So apps are pretty popular right now. There's a couple of communities that are sort of peer-to-peer that is available. It's kind of like there's newer models. They're not distinctly mental health care. Sort of like if you if you and your friends are really into, herbs and healthy eating and stuff like that, it doesn't make you doctors, right? But these organizations do have some, volunteers who have some training. But I think what a lot of people need right now is someone to talk to, someone to lean on, who can just sort of be there. And a lot of people don't have anyone in their lives that they feel like they can do that with, or that they feel are strong enough to maybe hold them. So in these forums where people show up intent on doing that for others, there can be just a little bit more of a general base of support. So I can send that to you, and there's a number of links in that. But other than that, if you're looking for mental health care that you can't afford therapy, and it's very hard to get into therapy right now just because so many people are having a hard time, that would be turning to agencies. And unfortunately, that's not the best mental health care in the world. But there are a couple good ones that can be located in the area. But yeah, it's tough times. I mean, I think everybody's sort of full to brimming with with mental health care. But yeah, I'll send you that article so you can get those links.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I just want to say too, it's in the article, but I think using clergy, using community leaders, drawing on people that have been mentors in the community. And you're probably some of them right here. So my advice might be that people turn to you all.
Speaking of that, I'm kind of like the therapist at work or the mom at work, like, and I've just been noticing that people are just like, they don't say it's because of, well, they might or might not say that they're more stressed, or I don't know what to like. Normally I can help them through things, and it doesn't seem like I can help them through things now. And I feel like, I don't know how to help them when they don't think that they might need more help than normal.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, do you have any specific kind of quandaries there?
I mean, normally I could talk them down from the ledge, it just takes a lot more time, or sometimes I don't feel like I'm as effective as I normally am when helping them through things.
What kind of workplace is it?
It's just a web development company. So, we're all working from home, and everyone's like just a little bit, some people are just not taking it as well as other people. And it's, I can see it coming out, and it's like, I can't really help them as much as I normally would. So I can't give them
what you're describing is this year.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's something that, to be frank, my job got a lot harder this year, right? I mean, I am the therapist, right? And every single person went into crisis at the same time, and so did I. So it's harder, right? It's what you do is probably a steeper climb. You're probably more fatigued. Yeah, I think maybe what might be useful is to keep in mind the intent matters greatly, and that you're there, and that you care, right? And maybe you build in 10 extra minutes than what you would usually expect. I do think hanging out and waiting with people to really kind of reveal, but I'm sure you're not actually, needing to show up as a therapist to these people.
But that really helps. Just knowing that I'm intending to help them really helps me think that I'm helping them more than I've been feeling lately.
Yeah, I mean, I think expressing care, and maybe it's sending them a text on a day off, right? Saying, thinking of you. I think small gestures right now are kind of everything. And that we keep each other in the fold. I think this is a time we've seen a considerable amount of goodwill come from people in this hard year. And I think that's what you're describing, is you have that. And maybe it's enough to say you're helping to shoulder the burden by caring.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Anyone else? Yeah.
Vicky.
You're on mute. I had to unmute.
I have been struggling with it a little bit, but I've been treating myself with a treatment that many, probably at least 1,000 people in the Seattle area are doing right now, and it's cold water immersion.
Oh,
And I'm late to this meeting because I was just swimming in Lake Washington with just my swimsuit. And
Wow.
I'm high for like 5 to 7 hours afterwards.
Oh my gosh.
With an endorphin high where I'm just like, yes. And instead of having a New Year's resolution, I just had a New Year's word, connection. And this silly cold water swimming, often referred to as wild swimming, has really nurtured that connection word too, because it's huge in the Seattle Puget Sound area. And I've been going to some of the organized swims where people meet and swim together. And I feel like I know every one of them already because I go to Western Washington Wild Open Water Swimmers or Seattle Open Water Swimmers, these Facebook groups, you know, and everybody posts because everybody's also gets a little bit buzzed and they just want to talk about it. And so I kind of feel like I know all these people before I even meet them for the first time. And it's just wonderful. And it's done a lot as far as clearing up depression, anxiety, and de-stressing.
Well, and look at you, you're describing all of my categories: body, mind, emotions, and meaning making. I love it. You're my hero. I love that. Is the last thing on earth I would want to do, but I'm so impressed. I wish I was you.
I've been swimming all winter feeling like I cheat because I've got a really cozy wetsuit on and I can just walk in the water and I just hardly even feel it. So today
really?
all right, I'm just going to get in with my swimsuit. And that was really hard. But once I was in, I was good.
I love that. And I also love what you're describing as like thinking outside the box. Like that's a mental health fix right there. I go into the water, right? I mean, that's so great. We take these really long walks in our new neighborhood, like long walks, like they have to really get our heart pumping. And like, let's try to take a different route every day. And that's a mental health thing that we've developed in our family. I think that's a great point. Yeah, I love it.
Cool.
I'm so impressed. I can barely stand to swim in the lake in August.
I have a question.
Yeah.
This is actually my first meeting, but you mentioned your tween and teens. What do you recommend for those guys who are just losing their mind?
I recommend that SBS gets their head out of their ass, but you know, that's just me. It's tough. I actually wrote an article about that too. For Seattle's Child last week. It's tough. I mean, that's a very tough age group, especially the young teen. Do you have teens at home?
Yes, I have a 13-year-old.
Yeah,
Yeah,
me too. My 12-year-old's almost 13 is struggling the most. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I think because this year has been so hard on them, and because there is so little to hold them in place, and they're a little bit less excited about us intervening. I mean, right, Mom? Probably not super excited about, you know, my 12-year-old keeps saying, quit asking me how I'm doing. Like, get out of my face. So I think being gentle is the overriding thing. Like, be gentle, offer opportunities, and kind of go with the flow of things that they already enjoy. So it's a tough one because sometimes what that looks like can feel like it's going along with patterns that are a little more dysfunctional. And the truth is, it is. Kind of like what I said to Alan, I think we have to accept that the bar is low and that you show up with a really full heart matters more than anything. Nagging your kid and fighting all day long is going to be the very worst thing. I mean, it'd be better for them to be in bed and do nothing and, you know, teeter with a loving relationship than to be fighting with you, because by the way, that's not going to make any change in the other habits anyways. Yeah. And go jump in the lake with your kids. That's my
Yeah.
advice.
Thank you.
Good luck. I can't get my kid to walk out the front door.
Like,
Except
give them
to go play at
give them to
Brett's
Vicky,
house.
right?
Right. Swim camp. Oh, y'all have such good questions. Anything else? Or anything anyone?
I have, and I know there's no magic. I mean, I know there's no magic answers to any of this. I'm a high school social worker in Pierce County, and I work with special ed kids, and I've been actually back in school since October.
Oh, wow.
But but what I'm thinking about is that you know, the George Floyd trial, the Derek Chauvin trial is happening, and then Dante Wright gets murdered with a taser mix up.
God.
And I was talking with my therapist actually from 6 to 7 tonight on Zoom.
Perfect.
And we were, part of the conversation was about the trauma for different, I mean, the levels of trauma and the ongoing trauma of this trauma. I mean, just that never ending. And, you know, the baby who got shot in 23rd and Jackson, I mean, it just obviously goes on. And some of us are now more aware of it than we were a year ago or two, or Trayvon Martin a number of years ago. I mean, it just, it's just that extra layer. And I think those of us who live in the South End are particularly more invested, whether we're white or not white, like we live down here because we give a shit about this stuff. Anyway, so if you have anything just you want to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's been talked about also generally, but in mental health circles as a triple pandemic year, right? There's the health crisis, then there's the you know, dealing with racism pandemic, and the unrest that comes with that. That's high time that there's unrest, and the economic one,
right?
For so many people, or the uncertainty of so many people's livelihoods, which has been relieved actually a bit, you know, in recent governmental measures. But yeah, I mean, I think this time signals so many different kinds of unsettling movements, meaning like rumbling in the earth kind of movements. Things that need to move are also moving. And I think that there's something really on a spectrum from catastrophic to let's make this better. Let's do things differently. If we're all kind of on, not pause, but if life is kind of reduced down to us just sort of focusing on the few things that are going on, like in the news, it begins to feel different. All these social justice points begin to be felt more than when we're in our busy lives. So I think we are sitting with that now as a mental health question of how do people lean back into their lives without turning away. And it brings a lot of people a lot of symptoms, frankly, to go through facing it. And that's important. And it's also, just like anything else, we have to watch the levels that people are affected by these things. I mean, there is a mental health crisis that one can have from being involved in things that are too painful, right? So we all have to still be able to take care of ourselves or notice when others around us do not seem stable, right? So kind of mental health first, right? Like the oxygen mask, put it on yourself first before your child. You know, the activist or the person who has a lot of concerns has to also be able to be a stable person in the world. So that's sort of mental health first, and to be able to get back out into the streets or to be able to do good in the world. But I think we are facing a lot of unrest that's not going to end just because there's a vaccine, or maybe we get back to normal a little bit. Also, it's very political, so I don't know that that's going to happen anytime soon, because enough people disagree in this divided country. So, or maybe that's the fourth pandemic. We're going to have this dissent now, right? We're not going to wear masks, and we're against the vaccines, and so what, are we just going to stay stuck forever? So I think we have kind of a lot on our plates right now as a country, as a people. So we'll see how that plays out in you know. Check yourself, right? How do you remain centered in your own life would be the main concern. All right. And doesn't Vicky look like she's on a boat?
Arr.
It's true. It's the vest.
I'm all bundled up because my core is still cold.
And she goes back in.
Mm-mm.
I love it. Okay.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you all. I appreciate you having me.
Thank you,
Thanks
Liz.
for coming.
Yeah.
Thank
and
you.
Yeah, thank
I
you for coming.
admire your work. So really, if there's anything you ever need, it doesn't have to be just now, but feel free to keep my info and get in touch if you have any questions at any time.